How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we stand Daf Yud Daf 19 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, the pre-Yom Kippur Babble on Talmud marathon continues. It is right now 8:04 in the morning on Erev Yom Kippur. Since 8:41 p.m., I have recorded 2 episodes, 2 dafs of Babble on Talmud, recorded and uploaded a daf just before it went live, slept for an hour and a half, reviewed 2 daf, made slides for 2 daf, and here we are recording Daf Yud Tes, and hopefully after this Daf Chaf. I have not yet begun to get the apartment in order. My parents are right now on a flight. They will be landing hopefully in Eretz Yisrael in a few hours, and hopefully they will not come into a pigsty. So that still needs to happen. But Chevra, let us begin here on Daf Yud Tes of Masechta Zevachim. Okay, this is, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff on this daf. I got 5 sections here on this daf. It might be a big one, but it's a goodie. Tomorrow's daf is also going to be good. Anyways, so section number 1, what is considered an extra vestment for a kohen? Okay, you can see a little bit of a machalkas over there. What is a hatzitza in a kohen's vestment? I think you're probably going to hear me saying the word vestment as much as I can after Dennis taught it to me. I was close, but no cigar. Kiddush. So we start getting into this. I didn't add it, but there's a tiny little 2-line thing about mechusar kapara, mechusar kippurim. But okay, I didn't add a section for that. Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim daily versus Yom Kippur. So basically, we are getting into Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim, which is cool. It's kind of a new sugya that we haven't really kind of explored much, I think, over the past 5.5 years. So that's going to be interesting. Also, Yom Kippur is going to come up, which is cool because it's Erev Yom Kippur. Next, how to do Kiddush Yadayim how do you do Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim? And finally, Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim expiration. Does it expire? Right? If you do Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim, we're going to have to talk about what is Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim. Why do you do it? When do you do it? But once you've done it, how long is it good for? How long does it last for? When's the next time you have to do it once again? So friends, that is what we have on the agenda for today. Basically wrapping up the kind of mechusar begadim kind of stuff, and then moving on to the next I guess main section, which is Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim. That is what we have in store. Let us begin. Our journey begins on Daf Yud Tes Omid Aleph, about 5-6 lines into the Omid at the 2 dots. Tanan, awesome, we learned over there. Who could tell me where? Masechta Erevin, all the way at the end of Masechta Erevin. Kohen shelaka be'etzba'o. Okay, so you have a kohen, and he's working in the Beis HaMikdash, and it's on Shabbos. Okay. Now, he's got a cut, let's say, on his finger. He's got a cut on his finger. Okay. Chevra, first of all, by the way, I hope my brain is working. I slept an hour and a half last night, but hopefully it'll be all right. I've had enough coffee, hopefully. So he got a cut on his finger. So there are two noteworthy things here. There are 2 noteworthy things here. So first of all, it's Shabbos, and it's in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, one noteworthy thing is that he's going to be putting a bandage, some kind of a reed, or he's going to wrap some kind of a reed around it. So that's interesting because that is something that's uniquely permitted in the Beis HaMikdash, because there's the concept of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, Tanu Dirabonans in the Beis HaMikdash. Of course, we know that refuah on Shabbos is prohibited. It's a din derabanan, out of concern that you might end up grinding up medicines. However, in the Beis HaMikdash, you say Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, and therefore he's allowed to wrap this reed around it that has some kind of medicinal quality to it. So that's noteworthy item number 1, that he's allowed to wrap a reed around the cut in the Beis Hamikdash, specifically because of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. We're not concerned about refuah on Shabbos. And noteworthy item number 2 is that his finger is a place that is not generally covered by one of the priestly garments. Okay, so so if we're talking about a kohen hedjit, so the 4 priestly garments would be his hoizen, his michnasayim, his pants, his keppel, his mitznefes, his hat, his gartel, his belt, and his me'il. Is that what it would be called? No, kisones probably. Is kapota. He's a chassidish yid. He's got a kapota, a gartel, a keppel, knickers. I think that's what they call them. So the kohanim be'etzim chassidish yid. Akoponim. So what's noteworthy also is that this bandage of sorts, or this reed, is being wrapped around a finger. A finger is not a place where you have any priestly garments there. Now, let us have so let's now take another look at the Gemara. Tananas, we learn in a Mishnah in a Rivin, kohen shelaka be'etzba'o. So a kohen who's working in the Beis Hamikdash and Shabbos, and he has a cut on his finger, karich ale gmi b'mikdash. He is permitted in the Beis Hamikdash to wrap reeds around the wound and continue doing his avodah. Avol lo b'medina, but he may not wrap reeds around his wound outside of the Beis Hamikdash, as I explained, because ein shvus b'mikdash, and outside, and there's generally on Shabbos a din d'Rabbanan against refuah on Shabbos out of concern that you might grind up medicines. Now, if his intention is to extract blood from the wound, well, then you can't do that even in the Beis Hamikdash. Certainly not outside the Beis Hamikdash, but also certainly not in the Beis Hamikdash, because it's a deoraisa, and you can't be machal Shabbos midoraisa in the Beis Hamikdash. There are certain things you could do, like slaughter the korbanos. That's a different story. But you can't make a wound on Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay. All my Reb Yehuda Breder Reb Chia. So now here's where the machlokes between Reb Yehuda Breder Reb Chia and Reb Yochanan comes in. Reb Yehuda Breder Reb Chia. Reb Chia, of course, had 2 sons, Yehuda and Chizkiah. So this is Reb Yehuda Breder Reb Chia. He says, Lo shanu el gni. So he's allowed to wrap reeds around his finger. Aval tziltzul kohen, but a small belt, have a yisur, that begadim. That would be considered adding vestments. That would be considered an added vestment. So he can wrap a reed around the wound on his finger, but not a small belt. If he does, that would be considered a 5th vestment. That's not allowed. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan says, wait a second. When we talk about adding vestments, we had seen, for example, a brisa yesterday in Daf Yudches, towards the bottom. We had seen a brisa yesterday that it said, for example, if he adds an extra pair of michnasayim or an extra avnit, right, an extra belt, right, if he adds extra garments in where there are already garments, so that's extra vestments. But adding a belt on his finger, argues Rabbi Yochanan, is not an extra vestment. Okay, so again, Rabbi Yochanan says, when we talk about extra vestments, that's elab makom begadim, that's in places where there are priestly vestments. Aval shaloi b'makom begadim, but on a finger, a place where there are no priestly vestments, lo ave yisur, then there would be no concern for yisur begadim, and sure, you can place a belt there on your finger. There's no concern about yisur begadim. Now, frag the Gemara. We're all concerned about, this kohen got a cut on his finger. We've been concerned about maybe it's a fru on Shabbos, okay, in Shvus b'mikdash. Maybe it's yisur begadim. But what about the fact v'teipukle mishum hatzitza? But one second, what about this question? A hatzitza. that if you have a kohen and he's working the base of mikdash, he's got a cut on his finger, and he's putting on, whether it's reeds, whether it's a little belt on it, whatever it is, he's putting something on the finger. Well, now when he's doing the avoda, there's going to be a hatzitza. I was trying to figure out the word earlier, but I didn't succeed in my own mind, and I don't know what it is now. Hatzitza, a impediment? Maybe an impediment. Why not? I don't like that word. I don't know if it's a good enough word. But there would be like a interruption. That's not bad. An interruption between his hand and whatever he's holding, right? In the base of Mikdash, we need direct contact. We can't have anything in between. So, for example, if he's doing Kabbalah Saddam and he's holding the klisharis, he needs to be holding that klisharis with his hand. He can't have some kind of reed wrapped around his finger. That's not okay. So, no. So v'teipukle mishum chatzitza. What about, shouldn't we be concerned about chatzitza? Bismol. The cut is on his left hand, and the avoda he's doing is with his right hand. Good answer. Inami, alternatively, you can even say it's talking about his right hand, but shelo b'makom avoda. It could be on a part of his hand that is not used in the avoda, that won't be a chatzitza. For example, what if the cut's on the top of his finger? So you could put a reed on the top of his finger, as long as it's not wrapped around and going to be on the bottom of his finger, as long as the dressing or whatever is limited to the top of the finger, for example, so then it won't be creating any chatzitza when he's holding the klisharis. Okay, fine. So we're not. So there isn't a concern. There is a concern about chatzitza, but it's not relevant here because either the cut was on his left hand or on the top of his hand, whatever it is. Ufliga de Rove. Now, Reb Yechanan argues with Rava, although the truth is, Rava really argues with Reb Yechanan, right? Reb Yechanan was earlier, so Reb Yechanan's not going to be arguing with Rava. Reb Yechanan wasn't even alive when Rava was alive. But Rava, what Rava says argues on Reb Yechanan. Dam Rava, because it says Rava Amar of Chizda, b'makim begodim. So if we're talking about Yisur begodim, bimakum begodim, in a place where there are priestly vestments. So even one thread. So it's saying chotzetzes, but I think it's talking about Yisur begodim. Even an extra thread would be Yisur begodim. Now, shelo b'makim begodim, if we're talking about shelo b'makim begodim, so now Rabbi Yochanan had said, Rabbi Yochanan had said, shelo b'makim begodim lo have yisur begodim, that there's no concept of yisur begodim whatsoever, shelo b'makim begodim. On a finger, there's zero concept of yisur begodim. Now, says Rava, however, shelo b'makim begodim, where it's not makom begodim, so on your finger, for example, sholish al sholish chotzetzes. If you have a garment that's three, I imagine this is 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, so then that would be yisur begodim. Pachos mikan einon chotzetzos. But less than 3 finger breadths would not be a chatzitza, would not be yisur begodim. So Rabbi Yochanan, ad Rabbi Yochanan vade pliga. So Rav certainly argues on Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan had said that when it's shelo b'makom begodim, so for example on your finger, there's zero concept, says Rabbi Yochanan, there's zero concept of yisur begodim on your finger. Whereas Rav says there is a concept. If the garment is big enough, it could be considered yisur begodim. If it's three etzbos by 3 etzbos, it could be yisur begodim. But maybe Rava does not argue with Rabbi Yehuda Brei Rabchia, because even though Rabbi Yehuda Brei Rabchia is talking about this little belt that's less than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, and Rava had said less than shalosh shal shalosh is not yisur begodim, and Rabbi Yehuda Brei Rabchia is saying that this little belt is yisur begodim. But maybe that's just because shiny tziltzul kohen de choshe. because this little belt is significant. It's significant. And because it's choshev, because it's significant, so therefore it could be considered Yisur Begadim, even though it's smaller than 3 by 3. But maybe, in principle, Rava would agree with that, and Rava, when Rava says less than 3 by 3 is not Yisur Begadim, it's for a regular garment, but maybe this little belt, they could all, Rabbi Yehuda, Brei Reb Chia, and Rava can agree that it would be considered Yisur Begadim. So, anyways, Rava definitely argues on Reb Yochanan, who says that there's zero concept of Yisur Begadim on a finger, but he might agree with Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia that a small little belt could be considered Yisur Begadim, even though Rava says it's only Yisur Begadim generally once it's 3 by 3. Now, Lishna Achrina, there is another version of, I believe, Rabbi Yochanan. Lishna Achrina Amrila, Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia, says Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia, Lo shanu ela gmi aval tziltzul kain chotzetz. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia says the same thing, that if you have this little belt, it would be Yisur Begadim. So when you have reeds are wrapped around the wounded finger, it is not Yisur Begadim. But if it would be a small little belt, it would be Yisur Begadim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar now says Rabbi Yochanan, this is different. Whereas before Rabbi Yochanan said there's zero concept of Yisur Begadim on a finger, this time he actually says the same thing as Rava. Rabbi Yochanan Amar lo amu hatzitza b'pachas b'shalosh al shalosh ela b'makom begadim. When we're talking about a hatzitza, when we're talking about Yisur Begadim with less than shalosh al shalosh, that's going to be b'makom begadim, in a place where there are priestly vestments. Aval shelo b'makom begadim, but on a finger, shalosh al shalosh chotzitzos pachas mikein eina chotzetzes. However, if we're talking about a finger, in order for it to be a hatzitza, it would have to be 3. Right, for it to be a Yisur Begadim, it would have to be 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. It would have to be shalosh al shalosh. Less than shalosh al shalosh would not be Yisur Begadim. V'hainu de Rava Amar of Chizda. And this is what Rava is saying. So according to this version, Rabbi Yochanan and Rava are in cahoots. Lema pligad Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia. So maybe, should we say that Rava argues on Yehuda Brei Reb Chia, that Rava had said that less than 3 finger breadths is not Yisur Begadim. Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia says that this little belt, which is less than 3 by 3, is Yisur Begadim. I hope I said everything right. But that Rava says less than 3 by 3 is not Yisur Begadim. Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia says this little belt is Yisur Begadim. Shani tziltzul kain dechashiv. We could say no. Taka Rava and Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia actually agree, like we said earlier, that the only reason why Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia says that this little belt is Yisur Begadim is because it's chashiv. But generally, he would say less than 3 by 3 is not Yisur Begadim. So we could say that they argue that they agree. Ulu Rabbi Yochanan Ma'irya Gmi. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that less than 3 by 3 is not Yisur Begadim, even if we're talking about this little belt, right? Rabbi Yehuda Brei Reb Chia said this little belt is Yisur Begadim. Rabbi Yochanan says it is not. It's less than 3 by 3. It's not Yisur Begadim. So if that's the case, why is Rabbi Yochanan? So if that's the case, why is the Mishnah saying the lesser chiddush of wrapping a reed around the finger? Say the bigger chiddush of wrapping a little belt around the finger, and even though it's chashiv, it's not Yisur Begadim. So Rabbi Yochanan, my area gmi, why are we talking about a reed? Lashmuin and tziltzul kain say that he can even wrap a little belt around it, and it's not Yisur Begadim. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that should be the bigger chiddush. Answers the Gemara, Milsa agav orchi kamashman de gmi masi. Well, because the Mishnah is teaching us an additional factor, which is that reeds are medicinal. Reeds have a healing property, and that is why they are permitted specifically in the Beis HaMikdash, because Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. But by Medina, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, they would not be allowed because we'd be concerned about refuah on Shabbos. Okay, fine. Very interesting discussion there about Yisur Begadim Shelo B'Makom Begadim. And now we get to the next section of today's daf. What is a hatzitza in a kohen's vestment? Basically, we're going to have lots of I think just kind of like theoretical scenarios, and we're going to be like, is this a hatzitza? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Here goes. But Rav asks, what if there's a nice breeze going through the Beis Hamikdash, and it breezes through the kohen's clothing, and now there's breeze in between the kohen's garment and the kohen's flesh. Al b'sar b'in v'aleka. Do we say that we need, right? We can say bad yiyu al b'saro, right? That the garments must be on the flesh, no breeze in between. Maybe it just means, or maybe it's like, look, you're just wearing it normally. Maybe it's all good. Kina ma'ushet tachutz. What does a louse make a hatzitza? If the louse is dead, so then certainly it would be a hatzitza between the garment and the flesh. But what about if the louse is alive? Do we say that since the live louse comes and goes, so then it maybe would just be considered like a growth of sorts, like a wart or something, and it's not a chatzitza. Odilma came the kopidolo, or maybe since people don't like louses around, so I think louses is lice. People don't like lice around, so chaitza, it would be a chatzitza. Offer mau sheyachutz, would dirt make a chatzitza? Offer vade chaitz, dirt of course makes a chatzitza. Ela avok offer mau. What about very thin, dusty dirt? Would that be a chatzitza? Base hasheki mau. What about by the armpit? By the armpit, does the garment mamish need to go right up into the armpit, get right up in there, or maybe there could be a little bit of aeration, of airflow by the armpit? Mau sheyachutz al basar ba'inon v'aleka. Do we need al basar? Do we need it to be mamish all up in the armpit? Odilma derech levisha b'chach. Maybe it's just normal to kind of wear garments with a little bit of give in the armpit. What if he sticks his hand into his bosom? Gufo michayetz. Would sticking his hand, I guess, between his garment and his bosom, would that be a chatzitza? Can one's own hand be a chatzitza? A separation, an interruption. Nima ma'u shetachutz. What about a thread that gets in between the garment and the flesh? Nima vade chaitza. A thread, of course, would make a chatzitza. Ella nima miduldelis ma'u. Yeah, but what if the thread got snapped, got disconnected, so it's not technically connected to the garment anymore, but it's still stuck in the garment? Is it a chatzitza or not? Mar Rav Ashi asks, Yotza Sairo b'bigdoma. What if his hair was long enough that it got in between the garment and his flesh? Sairo kegufadami or lav kegufadami. Do we say that his hair is like his body or not? Right. So even if we want to say that like your hand is like your body, as we said, that we asked about that earlier. But what about would your hair be considered part of your body? Boy, Reb Zera. Okay. So now we get into an interesting discussion about phylacteries, tefillin. By Reb Zera asks, tefillin ma'u sheyachotzu. If a kohen is wearing tefillin, would that be a chatzitza? According to the opinion who says that tefillin, the zman tefillin is only during the day, nighttime is no time for tefillin. So it's a non-starter. There's nothing to ask about. Since if one were to wear tefillin at night when there's no mitzvah to wear tefillin, it would surely be a chatzitza. Yom nami chaytzei. So during the day as well, it will be a chatzitza. Since at night it's a chatzitza, we'll say it's a chatzitza during the day as well. But the question is, but according to the opinion who says that nighttime is the time for tefillin, i.e. daytime and nighttime, all the time is the time for tefillin. So in that case, would tefillin be a chatzitza or not for a kohen. Mitzvah de gufe chayitz. Wait, what is Rashi? There's a Rashi here. V'tana de itzrich lashminin im inichon ein chotzos mishum yisur begadam de itzrich lashminin to lav beged. So I think Rashi says on the top of Daf Yomi Zevachim base that the question really here by tefillin is it going to be yisur begadim, an extra garment? So now, do we say mitzvah de gufe chayitz olo chayitz? Do we say that this mitzvah, right? If we assume that nighttime is also a time for tefillin, daytime, nighttime, all time for tefillin. So do we say that it's mitzvah de gufe? I imagine it means a mitzvah that he does with his body, I guess. So do we say it would be a hatzitza, the tefillin, that it would be yisur begadim, lo, or not? Igalgol milso mat the kamedur. Ami, the question came before him. Ami Omar lehu, Omar le. Maybe it says to Rav Zera. Talmud aruchu biadenu. Staka a halacha. We have such a halacha. Tefillin chotzitzos. Tefillin make a hatzitza. It would be yisur begadim. Meisvei. We have a kasha. Kehanim b'aveidason u'levim b'duchonim v'yisob ma'imodan. The kehanim doing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, the levim, the shiram u'lezimrom, and the yidden that who were there to daven for the korbanos, right? It says, "As korbani lachmi leisha reach yichochi tishmur la'akriv li b'meyado." You should guard your korbanos, and there would be Yisraelim whose job it was to daven. Some of them would be in Nazar, some of them would not. Some of them would be in the Beis Hamikdash, some of them would be in their towns, but there would be people always davening for the korbanos. P'tur minat tefillah u'minat tefillin. So these kahanim, these levim, these Yisraelim who were involved in the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, so they were p'turin from tefillah, from praying, since they wouldn't be able to have proper concentration, or the kila, at least the regular prayers, right? I think the Anshi Maimon Dafka were praying for the korbanos. Uminat tefillin, and the p'turin from tefillin, because osik b'mitzvah potter min mitzvah. If they're busy working in the Beis Hamikdash, they're potter from tefillin. So my love, eminichon einun chotzos. We're saying that they're potter from tefillin, implying that if they they don't need to. Osik b'mitzvah potter min mitzvah. They're busy doing korbanos kind of stuff, so they don't need to put on tefillin. But it sounds like if they did, but if they did put on tefillin, it would not be yisur begadim, it would be fine. No, right? Rabbi Ami had said a few lines ago that tefillin would be a hatzitza. So yachi p'turim asurim mibaylev. Then why are we saying that if they put on that they're p'turim from tefillin? It should say they're asurim from tefillin. Kevon deika levim v'Yisraelim delo masnu le osir mishumachi tana p'turin. Yeah, but the thing is, it would be osir for the kohanim, because it would be a chatzitza for the kohanim, because they have specific garments to wear, the 4 priestly garments. For Yisraelim, for levim, it would not be osir. So since for levim and Yisraelim, the appropriate word is potter, so for kohanim it also says potter. But the fact of the matter is, for them it would be also, because it would be a chatzitza vatanya imenichon einon chotzitzos. But we have a brisa that says that if kohanim put on tefillin, it would not be a chatzitza. Lo kasha, no problem. Ha diyad ha derosh. It depends if we're talking about the tefillin shel yad, which would go where they had, I guess, probably their ksones, or versus Adirosh, or the Tefillin Shel Rosh, which would go on their head. But one second, what's the difference between Tefillin Shel Yad and Tefillin Shel Rosh? If you can tell me, because while Tefillin Shel Yad, it says, Yilbash Abasar, he's got to wear it on his flesh. Therefore, the ksones needs to be on his flesh. You can't have your tefillin between the flesh and the garment. The Rosh Namiksiv, that the that the hat needs to be on his head. And there shouldn't be anything between the hat and his head. Well, Tano, Sairo Nira Bein Tzitzta Mitznefes, however, by the Kohen Gadol it says that the Kohen Gadol's hair would be visible between the tzitz, the golden plate that he would wear on his forehead, and the mitznefes, his hat. His hair would be visible in between Shasham, Maniach Tefillin, and that is where he would adorn, that's where he would put on his tefillin. So the point being that when it comes to the tefillin shel rosh, it would not be a hatzitza, because by tefillin shel rosh there's room for it to put it on the hair, and it would also not be considered an extra garment. However, to wear tefillin shel yad, that would go on his flesh between the mitznefes and his arm, and now that would prevent the mitznefes from being flush on his flesh. So that would be a chatzitza. Okay, so that would be a chatzitza. Okay, the concern there is that it would be a chatzitza. It would be in between the flesh and the garment. Tefillin shel rosh, however, would not be a chatzitza because there's room for it there on his hair. That wouldn't be between that, right? It wouldn't make a chatzitza between the hat and his head. There's room for it on his hair. And it would not be considered an extra garment. It would not be considered yisur begadim. Okay, so there's the answer in terms of tefillin. Tefillin shel yad would be a chatzitza. Tefillin shel rosh would not be a problem, not be a chatzitza, nor would it be yisur begadim. Mechusar kippurim. So the next item in the Mishnah was that a kohen who was, let's say, a zav, and he's no longer a zav, and he went to the mikvah, and he was already a tvul yom, and now all that's lacking is he needs to now, the next day, bring his korbanos. If he does avodah, he's mechal the avodah minol, and how do we know? So, Omer Rav Huna Amar Kra, v'chipar leha kohen v'te'er mechal sheik tmeah. This pasuk, I believe, I didn't look it up, I wanted to look it up just to be sure, but I'm almost, actually I did look it up. Actually. This pasuk is by a yoledis. So a yoledis actually is an interesting scenario because a yoledis is what's called a tvulas yom aruch. She is a very long tvulas yom. Because a yoledis, let's say she gives birth to a daughter. So for 2 weeks, any dam is tuma, it would be treated as dam nida. But after 2 weeks, she goes to the mikvah, and then she's a tvulas yom, but not just till the end of the day, but for the next 66 days. She's what's called a tvulas yom aruch, and then at the end of 66 days, plus the original 14, so at the end of a total of 80 days, she then goes and brings korbanos, and only once she brings those korbanos, it says, v'chipar leha kohen v'tahira, and she is now pure. Tahira Michal She'u Tmeya, implying that up until then she would be considered Tmeya, and applying this to a kohen, if we're going to say that a kohen as Mechusar Kippurim, so long as he hasn't yet brought his korbanos, just like this Yoledes prior to bringing her korbanos, so we're going to say that he would be considered Tameh, and as we learned from V'yinazru, Yikachu B'nei Yisrael V'lo Yechalalu, that was what we learned at the very beginning of the parak. So somebody who's Tameh would be Mechal the Avoda, so Mechusar Kippurim is Tameh and would be Mechal the Avoda. And now we get up to the next section of today's daf, where we now move on to Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. Specifically, in this next section, we will be exploring Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim daily versus on Yom Kippur. Of course, it's Erev Yom Kippur. All right, it's been Erev Yom Kippur so far for the last 3 days here on Babble on Talmud, because this is the third daf that I'm recording, essentially on Erev Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we're gonna, sure, we could talk about it now. On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol, in between the 5 different avodas that he does, he changes his garments from the big day Lavan to the big day Zav. And each time before he does the avoda, he goes to the mikvah. And each time he goes to the mikvah, before he goes to the mikvah, he does Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, and afterwards he does Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. Right after this section, we're actually going to see how you actually do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. Be'etzem, Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim is that Kohanim would wash their hands and their feet before doing service in the temple. And the Kohen Gadol also, before and after he would go to the mikvah, 5 times. You go to the mikvah 5 times on Yom Kippur, and before and after each mikvah, he would do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim as well. Okay, so now, says the Gemara, V'shelo rachos Yadayim v'Raglayim. A kohen who does avodah in the Beis Hamikdash without having washed his hands and feet from the kior, although we're going to see on tomorrow's daf that technically the water doesn't need to come from the kior, can come from any klisharis. But anyways, the idea is that the water comes from the kior and you wash your hands and feet. The kohanim wash their hands and feet before doing the avodah. And if not, they don't do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, then the avodah is mechulal. As we learned, I think it was yesterday, that by mechusar begadim it says chuka, and also by shelo rachos yadayim v'raglayim I believe it says chok. So we say that by shelo rachos yadayim v'raglayim, just like by mechusar begadim, shelo rachos yadayim v'raglayim, if one does the avoda shelo rachos yadayim v'raglayim, the avoda is mechulal. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis start kohen gadol shelo taval v'shlo kiddush bein beged leveged uvein avoda la'avoda ve'avad. So a kohen gadol on Yom Kippur, tomorrow's Yom Kippur, Be'ezus Hashem, will be in the Beis Hamikdash tomorrow. We're not going to have our Korban Shlomim together, but maybe tomorrow, maybe let's make up a time. Maybe let's make up a time during the break tomorrow. During the break tomorrow. What time? Maybe during the break. Maybe at like 2 in the afternoon. In the Chotzer Beis Hamikdash, we'll get together for a little Babble on Talmud. I'll be. How will you identify me? I'm not exactly sure, but Hillel, you'll find me, and who I don't know who else is around here. But maybe, just look for me and Hillel. We'll be learning. Maybe Rabbi Yisrael will be there as well. So look for me, Hillel, and Rabbi Yisrael. Maybe Lauren, maybe you'll come. You'll find us, and maybe Reb Zach, and maybe Amir. You can be in Yerushalayim. We'll get all the Babble on Talmud Chevra. We'll have a little chabur tomorrow, maybe 2 in the afternoon in the Chotzer Beis Hamikdash. Okay. Hey, Amir, of course, bring Adiel. Adiel, of course, is welcome, and our Adiel could, of course, bring Geva and Yishai. They should all come. Of course, they're also more than invited, though. Why do I have a feeling like Geva and Yishai don't speak English? Okay, where were we? So the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, he does Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim and goes to the mikvah each time he's going to do avodah. What if he didn't? Okay, Kohen Gadol Shalai Taval. Kohen Gadol didn't go to the mikvah v'Shalo Kiddush, and he didn't do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim bein beged lebeged uvein avodah lavodah, between each time he switched his clothing and did a different avodah. V'avad, and he did the avodah nonetheless. Avedasu ksheir. The avodah is nonetheless a-okay. Ve'echad Kohen Gadol ve'echad Kohen Edget shelo Kiddush Yadav v'Raglav Shachris v'avad avodasu psula. Now, this is in stark contrast to a Kohen Hedget or Kohen Gadol when it comes to doing Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim in the morning before doing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, before doing the Talmud Shel Shachar. What does Rashi say? Shachar bein Yom Kippur bein Choshana. Right, meaning if he's going to be offering korbanos the rest of the year, so then the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim is ma'ake. And if he doesn't do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim and does avodah, it'll be psula, and the Gemara is going to ask what the difference is. So generally speaking, the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash requires Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, but on Yom Kippur, if he didn't do the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, each time he went to the mikvah, the avodah would be kosher. Omer le Rav Asi to Rabbi Yochanan, says Rav Asi to Rabbi Yochanan, Mirdei. Let's see. Chomish Tvilis v'asar Kiddushin de'oraisa. Here we go. So Rav Asi asks Rabbi Yochanan, he says, I don't understand. The 5 mikvahs and 10 Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, one before the mikvah, one after the mikvah, on Yom Kippur, it's all midoraisa. None of that. V'chuka ksiv behu. And it says, in general, by the Avodas Yom Kippurim, in Parshas Achremos, it says chuka, which would mean that it should be a law. It would have to be done. It should be ma'akev. So the akvu, he should have to do it. Why are we saying the Avodas Ksher, even if he didn't do the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim and Mikvah? So Amle Rabbi Yochanan responds, Amar Kra ulevei sham. Okay, because, let's, there are psukim there. These are psukim from Achremos, right? So we have one pasuk, right? So we have one pasuk that says, "Vaysalochem lechukas olam." So it says chukas olam. Bigadol, generally, when it comes to avoda on Yom Kippur, it says chok. It's a law. It has to be done that way. Now, however, we have another pasuk that says, "Ksonis bad kodesh yilbosh." Umichnase bad yir al basaro va'amnik bad yachor v'sefes bad yitznov big day kodeshem v'rochatz ba'moyim as basar ulevei sham. So this particular pasuk that I just read, the second pasuk, is talking about wearing the begadim and Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. So now, while we had this sort of general concept of a chok when it comes to the avodah of Yom Kippur, that things have to be done a certain way, but then we have a specific pasuk that talks about the clothing that he wears and doing Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, and in that pasuk it says ulevei sham twice, and that is to say that in this particular pasuk, what is me'akev is the garments that he's wearing. What is not me'akev is the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. To Dafka teach that the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim on Yom Kippur is not me'akev. Right, so Amar Kol, the pasuk says levisha me'akeves, that in that pasuk it's Dafka the levisha, Dafka the garments are me'akev. The ein davar acher me'akev, but nothing else in that pasuk is going to be ma'akev, i.e. the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim on Yom Kippur is not going to be ma'akev. Tzoavu panav. And when Rav Asi heard this gorgeous answer from Rabbi Yochanan, his face lit up. His face lit up. However, that lit up face was short-lived because Rabbi Yochanan then immediately said to Rav Asi, however, Vav a'ufsa kas vilach. Sorry to dampen your spirits, but I basically etched a vav into, like the letter vav, into a log that already, if you've ever seen a log with like bark on it, there's all these like lines, keilu, on the bark. These like these ridges, can you say? I guess on these. I feel like that's not the right word, but all right. These like ridges of sorts on the bark, and if you make like a etch on the bark, nobody's gonna notice it. Basically, that wasn't actually a really good answer because Yochid did Safra Nami. If we're saying that the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim is not me'akev, well then, right, on Yom Kippur, so then even the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim that he would do in the morning should not be me'akev either. And we had said earlier that the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim in the morning is me'akev. So Omer Chizkiah, rather, says Chizkiah Omer Kol, the pasuk says Va'isa loim chok olam lo ulizaro l'dorosam. Now the pasuk says in Sefer Shmos, it says V'rachatzu yadayim v'ragleim Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim v'lo yamusu Va'isa loim chok olam lo ulizaro l'dorosam davar ma'akev bizaro ma'akev bo. The Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim that must be done by the kohen hedyotis, by Aharon's sons, is what he must do, i.e., the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, to do the general avoda in the Beis HaMikdash in the morning. Dover she'eno ma'akev bizaro, but a Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim that is not required for his children, i.e., the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim on Yom Kippur, because they're not doing the avodas Yom Kippurim, ein ma'akev bo, so it's not ma'akev for him, and therefore if he does not do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim on Yom Kippur, the avodah would still be ksher. Rabbi Yonasan Amar says, Rabbi Yonasan mehacha from the following pasuk, v'rachatzu mimenu Moshe v'Aharon uvanu. It says by the kior that Moses, Aaron, and his children, Elazar and Isamar, will wash from the kior, from the basin in the Azar. Davar ma'akev bivanav ma'akev bo, that which is ma'akev with Aharon's children, or ma'akev with him. Davar sheno ma'akev bivanav, that which is not ma'akev with his children, i.e. the avodah in Yom Kippur, because they're not doing the avodah of Yom Kippur, ein ma'akev bo. So the Kiddush Yadayim, the Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim on Yom Kippur is not going to be ma'akev for the kohen gadol. Rabbi Yonasan, my time lo amrim with Chizkiah. Why doesn't Rabbi Yonasan learn out from Chizkiah's pasuk? Amalach, I would the doris with the because Chizkiah's pasuk says, "Vaysolem choklam lo lezar l'darosam." Rabbi Yonasan would say that pasuk is coming to teach that this is halacha. I mean, it's coming to teach that this applies to all generations, not to teach the hekish of Aharon and his children. No, that pasuk. The goal of that pasuk was to teach that this is halacha applies to all generations of Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim. Ve'idach and Chizkiah, my time lo amar me'ahai. Why does he not learn it out from Rabbi Yonasan's pasuk of v'rachatzu mimenu Moshe v'Aaron uvanav miboyle lechid Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, because Chizkiah would say that he needs it for the following, right? For like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina learns to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, kol kior she'ein bo kedei lekadesh arba kohanim, that any kior, any basin that is not large enough to be able to do Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim for 4 kohanim, mimenu, from it, ein mekadshin bo, so then we don't do Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim from that kior. Shenemar v'rachatzu mimenu Moshe v'Aaron ubanav, as the pasuk had said that it has to be enough for the kior, has to have enough water for Moshe, Aharon, and Elazar and Isamar for 4 people. So now the Gemara discusses how to actually do Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Keitzad mitzvahs Kiddush. How do you do Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim? Maniach yodo aimanis al gabi ragla aimanis. You put your right hand on your right foot. V'yada asmolis al gabi ragla asmolis, and your left hand on your left foot. Mekadesh, and then I guess you pour water on your hands and feet, and voila. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, maniach shtei yodov zo al gav zo. You put your right hand on top of your left hand, val gav shtei raglav, and your left hand on your, I guess, right foot, and your right foot on your left foot. You make like one vertical line of right hand, right foot, I guess. Zo al gav zo, everything stacked on each other. And you wash your hands that way. They said to him, you flogged it. I think you've gone a little too far. You're going to fall over. It's a good point. You are going to fall over. Amr of Yosef says of Yosef, V'chavero misayo. Well, his friend helps keep him balanced, helps prop him up. My benai, what's the difference between the Tanakama who says right hand on right foot, left hand on left foot, and Rabbi Yosef who says kind of make that very unbalanced thing? Amar Abai says, the question is, your friend propping you up, is that considered standing or not? According to Tanakama, no. According to Rabbi Yosef, sure. Amar Rav Sama Breder of Ashi V'Ravina. So this is of some Breder of Ashi V'Ravina V'Leisid Meisav V'Lekadosh. Let him just sit down and do Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim. Amar Kra, the pasuk says L'Sharis. Right, the pasuk says B'voim L'Ol Moed Yichzu Mayim V'Lo Yamusu or V'Gishtam Al Mizbech L'Sharis. It says by Kiddush Yadayim, it says Yirchatzu Mayim, it says L'Sharis V'Sheris Me'umadhu, and serving is standing. And now we get up to the final section of today's daf. Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim, expiration. We're going to see a machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon about if at some point you're going to have to do another Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim. Let's see. Tanu Rabbanan, Kiddush Yadayim v'raglav bayom. So if a person does Kiddush, this is the opinion of Rebbe. If a person does Kiddush Yadayim v'raglayim during the day, ein tzarich l'kadosh b'layla. If he's going to continue working through the night and burning the fats in the limbs, hektor chalavim ve'varim, mitzvos and atshiyah la'omer hashachar. So if he's going to continue working throughout the night, he won't need to do another Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim throughout the entire avoda. However, Balayla, if he's working the night shift and now he wants to continue into the morning, Sarich, the Kaddish Bayom Divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says, comes the morning, he will have to do another Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. It essentially expires. There's the concept of lina, right? We know, of course, if you have a korban that is left out past, right, overnight, if it needs to be burned by the end of the night and it's left overnight, it's lina. It basically expires. So here also says Rebbe, Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim can expire, and comes the morning, you have to go, no, you have to be Mekadesh Yadayim v'Raglayim nochamo. Shoy Rebbe Omer, the Rebbe would say, Lina mo'elis b'Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, that there's a concept of Lina by Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, comes the morning, you have to go, no, you have to be Mekadesh Yadayim v'Raglayim nochamo. Reb Elazar Reb Shimon Omer says, Elazar Reb Shimon, Ein Lina mo'elis b'Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. Reb Elazar Reb Shimon says, there is no concept of Lina by Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, and you can work throughout the night, then continue working through the day. You don't have to do another Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim at any point. Tani Yidach, we have another brisa. Haya omeid umakriv al gabe mizbeach kol halayla. So says so in this brisa, what's different about this brisa is that it specifies that he's mamish working the whole time. Meaning the first brisa, it doesn't necessarily say that he was working the whole time. Yeah, he came into the Beis HaMikdash, he did Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, but he wasn't necessarily doing avoda the whole time. And Rebbe says, comes the morning, he has to do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim nochamo. Rav Elazar Reb Shimon says he doesn't. Here we're being explicit that he's mamish, he's hard at work the entire time. Nonetheless, the Oraton Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, Divrei Rebbe says, comes the morning, he will have to do another Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, even though he's been working the entire time. He's got to stop, do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, then he can continue. Rav Elazar Reb Shimon Omer says, Rav Elazar Reb Shimon, Kevin shekidesh yodav v'ragam metchilas avoda. Whereas Rav Elazar Reb Shimon says, look, since when he got to the Beis HaMikdash, he did Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, and he's been hard at work the whole time, afilu mikan v'ad asar yomim, even if he's going to keep at it for 10 days, inu tzarich l'kadosh, he's not going to have to do another Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. Utzricha, we need both scenarios. The scenario where it's not explicit that he's working the whole time, and the scenario where it is explicit that he's working the time, because if we had the first case where he's not working the whole time, I can understand Rebbe's opinion that he says, okay, you haven't been working the whole time, you've been in the Beis HaMikdash, but you haven't been working the whole time, comes the morning, do another Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. So by Ikama Rebbe, that's what Rebbe says, the Pasuk le me'avoda la'avoda, that look, he took a break between different avodas, it's not like he was working non-stop the whole time, so comes the morning, you should do another Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. Avol, behad lo Pasuk le. But in the second brisa, where his mamish been working, ema modile, Rebbe the Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon. Maybe Rebbe would agree with Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon that if he's working, he should not have to do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim nochamo. So Kamash Milan, that even then he would have to do nochamo according to Rebbe. V'yash minon beha. And if we would only have the second case, the case of working round the clock, beha ka'amar Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon, I can argue, okay, if we only had this scenario, I'd say, okay, this is where Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon says he doesn't need to do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim nochamo because he's working. Avol. But in the first case where he took a break, maybe he would agree with Rebbe that he should have to do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim nochamo tzricha. Therefore, we have both brises to say that they hold resolute in their machlokes in both scenarios, when he took a break as well as when he's working. My time with the Rebbe, how come Rebbe says that he would have to go do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim nochamo? The pasuk says begishtam. Right, the pasuk says begishtam, when he comes, each time he comes to do avoda, so he does Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. My time with Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon, why does Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon says that once he does the Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, even for 10 days, he's good? The pasuk says, when you come to the Ol Moed, do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. Once you've come, you're good. Meaning, I assume as long as you haven't left, but like once you come, you're good for the duration of the stay. Rebbe, who says that he does have to do another Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, what does he do with bivoim? I'll tell you what, Rebbe does with Bivom. If it just said Begishtam without Bivom, just Begishtam, every time you go to do Avoda, you have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim, I would think literally every time you go to do Avoda, another Avoda, you're going to have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. Therefore it says Bivom, no. When it says when you come to the Oel Moed, you do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim, it means that when you come to the Oel Moed, you do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim, and that's going to last until the next day when there's a whole new Ma'arechet, and there's a new Talmud Shel Shachar, etc., a new Chumas Hadeshin and all sorts of avodas. So then you do it. Then it's Begishtam. Then you have to do another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. But otherwise, your one Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim should be good for the day. So Abamina I'll call Gisha V'Gisha. I would have thought, right, without Bevom, that every single time you come, you have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim because of Achman Bevom. Therefore, it says Bevom to say that one Kiddush Yadayim is good for the whole day. V'Idoch Nam Yaksiv Begishtam. What does Rabbi Shimon do with Begishtam, which means that there's multiple Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. So Yiksiv Bevom V'lo Ksiv Begishtam, because if it said Bevom without Begishtam, Have Amina Afilu Abir Rekonis. I may have thought, even if you just come to shoot the breeze, come to the Azar just to shoot the breeze, you should have to do Bevom. When you come, you have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. Therefore it says Begishtam. No, when you're going to do the Avoda, that's when you do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. Abir Rekonis Hoksiv the Sharis. Once I don't need Begishtam to exclude shoot in the breeze. It says in the pasuk already, Lishares. If you're going to serve, you do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. So Elo Begishtam Miboyle Lichadu Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. It's in for Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, also for Yom Kippur. Tam Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Hakol Modim Bekiddush Sheni Kishu Lavush Mikadesh. My time with Amarkra O Begishtam Mishenu Mechusa Ela Gisha Bilvad Yatzazesh Mechusa Levisha V'Gisha. This is a machloikes when it comes to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So as we said, each time he changes his garments, he goes to the mikveh. And each time he goes to the mikveh, he does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim before and afterwards. So there's a machloikes regarding the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim that happens before he goes to the mikveh. The question is he still clothed when he does that Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim pre-mikveh? One opinion is, yes, he is still wearing his clothes when he does the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim, and then he takes off his clothes and goes to the mikveh. The other opinion is that no, he takes off his clothes first, does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim, and goes straight into the mikveh. So there's a machlokas by the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim before the tefillah, but the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim after the tefillah, everyone agrees. He gets dressed, does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim, and goes straight in to the avoda, and that is learned from Begishtam. It says, "Oh, Begishtam Yishe'enu Mechusar." So again, 3 lines to the line. The Omar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Hakol Modim. Everybody agrees with Kiddush Sheni that when it comes to the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim after going to the mikveh, Kishu Lavish Mikadesh. He does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim when he's already dressed. My time I'll come. The Pasuk says, "Oh, Begishtam," or when he goes to do the avoda, Misha Einu Mechusar Ela Gisha Bil Vad. That when he does the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim right before he does the avoda, he's going straight into the avoda. He's not then getting dressed. But if he had to get dressed first, it wouldn't be going straight into the avoda from Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. You would have to get dressed first. So no, when it comes to the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim after mikveh, everyone agrees he's already dressed at that point. Lehaktir isha lomali. Why do I need the pasuk to say lehaktir isha? As Rashi says, right? Pshita the boy Kiddush da gishas mizbeach he. Right? We were talking about going to the mizbeach. You have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. Why are we then talking about lehaktir isha? It seems superfluous. So ma'adetema animile avoda de ma'akva kapara, but avoda de lo ma'akva kapara lo kamashman. Well, I may have had the havmina to say that when do you need to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim? Maybe it's only for avodas that are ma'akiv the kapara. For example, shchita, kabbalah, halacha, zrika, etc. But something like haktara semurin, haktara semurin is not ma'akiv kapara. If you don't do haktara semurin, you can still get kapara for the korban. So I might think that you wouldn't have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim for Aktara Seimur. So Kamash Milan, Lahaktir Isha, that even when it's coming to burn the Emurin, also you would do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim for that. Friends, that was Daf Yud Tes of Masechta Zevachim. I feel like that was a little bit shorter. How long? Yeah, it says here 1 hour and 8. I probably, I imagine that'll probably be cut down to about an hour, which is great because for a while, these dafs were like averaging like 1 hour and 15, 1 hour 20 plus, insane. So this actually felt a little bit more normal, which is interesting because this is a big daf. It was like 5 sections on this stuff. It was a lot here. and yet we got to move a bit, which is really nice. Alrighty, friends. So on today's daf, the first section was what is considered an extra vestment for a kohen. So if it's b'makom begadim anything, right? If it's a place where there are already priestly vestments, well then anything would be considered an extra vestment, or at least a hatzitza or whatever. Yeah, you got to make sure that where the michnasayim and mitznefes and all that stuff are, or ksones, whatever. All also mitznefes, also ksonos, also avnei. Where those things are, you don't want anything else there. Now shelo b'makom begadim, for example, on your hands or whatever. So here we saw some different opinions. Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Chia said even a small belt would already be considered yisur begadim, whereas Rabbi Yochanan version 1 said that shelo b'makom begadim there would not be any concept of yisur begadim, but Rabbi Yochanan version 2 said that if it's 3 finger breadths, so then it would be yisur begadim, but less than that would not be extra vestments. What is a hatzitza in a kohen's vestment? Okay, so that there were like a million different things there, like some dirt, what about if wind gets it? Like there were a lot of stuff. We didn't really answer those. But then we got to an interesting discussion there at the end about tefillin. Would tefillin be a chatzitza or not? Would it be considered yisur begadim or not? So we said tefillin shel yad is a chatzitza. Tefillin shel rosh is not a chatzitza and also would not be considered yisur begadim, an extra vestment. We discussed Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim daily versus on Yom Kippur. Daily is ma'akev, right? So the daily Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim that kohanim have to do in the morning, that of course is, if you don't do it, it's mechal la'avoda. Now when it comes to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, it is not ma'akev. Technically, if he does not do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, each time he changes garments, so the avoda could still be kosher there. How to do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim? The first opinion we saw is right hand on right foot, left hand on left foot. That's opinion number 1. And opinion number 2, which is I believe Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, was right hand on top of left hand, on top of right foot, on top of left foot, and you need somebody to prop you up there. And finally, Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim expiration. Rebbe says it expires at daybreak. Comes daybreak, you have to do noch Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim. You have to do Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim again. Whereas Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says it continues until you leave the beit, until the vote is over, until you're done in the Beis Hamikdash. The initial Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim will be valid. Friends, that was Daf Yud Tes of Masechtas Zevachim. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.